some mourning the loss of those dear to them, distance for safety. And you can't look down to read the speech, you have to take the speech up, because if you did, your neck would break, it would fall off.
When reports surfaced that Queen Camilla had claimed personal treasures of the late Queen Elizabeth, the palace was thrown into chaos. For King Charles and the senior royals, the revelation was like opening a door to a storm they never anticipated, one filled with betrayal, questions of loyalty, and shattered trust. Among the missing were jewels, heirlooms, and private journals, each steeped in history and memory. But what could drive such a bold move? And why did it ignite fury at the very heart of the monarchy? This is the story behind that explosive claim. Shadows after the crown. 3 years had quietly slipped by since the somber tolling of Westminster's bells marked the end of Queen Elizabeth's remarkable life. Yet despite the passage of time, the weight of her absence lingered heavily across the United Kingdom.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history.
Her presence, once a comforting constant in a rapidly changing world, had left a void so palpable that it seemed to echo through the corridors of power and the streets alike. People spoke her name in hushed tones, not merely out of respect, but out of a shared sense of loss that refused to fade. Though the crown had passed into the hands of King Charles, the air of steady continuity that Elizabeth had embodied seemed fractured, like a precious heirloom that had been handled too roughly and now bore the cracks of change. Her influence remained visible everywhere. Portraits of her lined the stately halls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, each canvas a reminder of her grace, her poise, and the quiet authority she had wielded over decades. Coins minted in her image continued to circulate, small metallic ambassadors of a reign that had shaped modern Britain. And in the gardens where she once walked, accompanied by her beloved corgis, one could almost imagine the soft patter of paws and the gentle rustle of skirts that had passed through decades of royal tradition. But the palace was no longer a place solely of memory and honor. Behind the grand facades and polished doors, a different kind of whisper had begun to stir. The hush of grief had been joined by murmurs of suspicion, hints of unease that slithered through the servants' corridors and echoed in the empty chambers. Something unseen was moving in the shadows, a presence that threatened to taint the careful, immaculate order that Elizabeth had maintained. It was not just a matter of missing objects or misplaced papers. No, the threat carried far greater implications. The very essence of her legacy, the principles, the trust, and the unbroken dignity that she had instilled, was at risk. The shadow that stretched across Buckingham and Windsor was one that could alter not just the immediate future of the royal household, but the course of the monarchy itself. It was a delicate, terrifying possibility that even in death, the influence of the late Queen might be challenged, her carefully preserved history put at risk, and her enduring presence in Britain's soul imperiled by actions unfolding behind palace walls. In those quiet, echoing halls, grief was no longer the only occupant. Suspicion, tension, and the promise of scandal now hovered, waiting for the right moment to emerge and rewrite the story of Elizabeth's legacy in ways no one could have anticipated. Elizabeth's legacy hangs by a thread as mysterious shadows creep through the palace, threatening to rewrite the monarchy's story forever. But who first uncovered the shocking disappearance, and which priceless treasures were taken? And what does this loss mean for the future of the crown itself? Let's delve into the details. A legacy in jeopardy. The unsettling discovery fell squarely on Donald Walton, the royal treasurer, whose lifelong duty had been to guard the Queen's most treasured possessions. He had walked the polished corridors of Buckingham Palace countless times, keys jingling at his side, confident in the layers of security that protected the crown's legacy. Yet, on that fateful morning, as he began his routine inventory deep within the palace vaults, a chilling realization took hold. Walton's usually steady hands began to shake, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Several of Queen Elizabeth's most prized belongings, items steeped in history, sentiment, and personal significance, were inexplicably gone. First, there was the sapphire Jubilee brooch, a delicate yet magnificent piece gifted to Elizabeth by Prince Philip during the early days of their marriage.
Princess Elizabeth met Prince Philip at a family wedding.
Walton's eyes scanned the velvet-lined display, tracing where the brooch should have rested. Its absence felt like a betrayal in itself, a symbol of a bond and a reign now disrupted. Next, his gaze fell on the double-strand pearl necklace, one of the Queen's most poignant heirlooms. It had once adorned her during the funeral of Princess Diana, a moment etched into history and collective memory. Now, it too had vanished, leaving only a space and a gnawing sense of dread. Yet the most alarming loss was not of jewelry at all. 2 leather-bound journals, painstakingly kept by the Queen, had disappeared. These were not simple diaries. They were intimate records of her thoughts, her reflections, and her careful observations. Pages filled with insights she had never shared aloud, secrets of the monarchy, and of a nation she had led with unwavering dedication. The journals were a direct glimpse into the mind of a sovereign, a piece of history that could never be replaced. These items were far more than trinkets or decorative treasures. Each held the weight of decades of service, the quiet decisions that shaped a nation, and the personal history of a monarch whose presence had defined an era. Their disappearance was not merely a theft, it was an affront to the trust that bound the royal household together, a crack in the very foundation of the crown. When news of the missing possessions reached King Charles, grief and disbelief gave way to a fury that simmered beneath his composed exterior. The loss struck at the heart of the monarchy itself, a direct defiance of the authority and dignity of the crown. But what made the act even more intolerable was its origin. The violation had occurred from within the palace walls, among those entrusted with the highest levels of loyalty. The betrayal was personal, institutional, and unprecedented, sending shockwaves through the corridors of power. The discovery was no longer merely about missing treasures. It had become a crack in the very foundation of the royal legacy. Whose story is truly at stake here? And what triumphs, secrets, and history were these objects meant to protect? Now let's uncover a legacy that reaches far beyond crowns, palaces, and power. Queen Elizabeth II. In a landmark step toward modernization and equality, 2011 saw the Commonwealth nations overturn a centuries-old rule that had limited succession to the British throne to firstborn sons.
The theme this year is women as agents of change.
This groundbreaking change, described by Harper's Bazaar as perhaps Queen Elizabeth II's most historic achievement for Britain, ensured that female members of the royal family would have equal rights to inherit the throne, ending a tradition rooted in strict male primogeniture. The Washington Post hailed the decision as a majestic moment for gender equality, highlighting the significance of granting daughters the same status as their brothers. For the Queen, this was not just a legal adjustment. It was a meaningful move toward fairness and modern values within one of the world's oldest monarchies. The Queen also made history through her international engagements. In 2011, she became the first British monarch in a century to visit Ireland, marking a diplomatic milestone. The 4-day visit, widely praised by both nations, symbolized reconciliation and goodwill. Her presence was seen as a gesture of peace and unity, strengthening ties that had long been complicated by history. The trip was celebrated as more than a ceremonial journey. It was a tangible sign of improved relations, a reminder of the soft power and influence the monarchy continues to hold in fostering international goodwill. Beyond diplomacy, Queen Elizabeth II's speeches have consistently shown her deep understanding of human emotion and connection. On December 25, 2020, amid the global pandemic, she delivered one of her most poignant Christmas addresses. Millions of people around the world, separated from loved ones due to lockdowns and safety concerns, found comfort in her words. Of course, for many, this time of year will be tinged with sadness, some mourning the loss of those dear to them, and others missing friends and family members distanced for safety, when all they'd really want for Christmas is a simple hug or a squeeze of the hand, she said. If you're among them, you're not alone, and let me assure you of my thoughts and prayers. Her words resonated widely, reminding audiences that compassion and empathy are as much a part of monarchy as ceremony and tradition. The Queen's commitment extended far beyond governance and ceremonial duties. Known for her love of animals, she actively supported hundreds of charitable organizations spanning wildlife conservation, education, the arts, and humanitarian causes. According to The Guardian, no monarch before her had contributed as extensively to charitable work. Her efforts helped raise over £1.4 billion for causes across Britain, supporting 2,415 charities domestically and nearly 3,000 worldwide. Through her tireless advocacy, Queen Elizabeth transformed the symbolic role of the monarchy into one of tangible social impact, ensuring that the crown's influence touched lives across generations. Through legal reform, historic diplomacy, heartfelt public addresses, and unmatched charitable dedication, Queen Elizabeth demonstrated a unique blend of tradition and progress. Her legacy extends far beyond her remarkable reign. It embodies compassion, equality, and lasting influence. But what happens when such a cherished legacy is threatened? And how should those who inherit the crown respond? Now let's delve into how King Charles confronts a betrayal that strikes at the heart of the monarchy itself. The King's fury. The summons had come with an urgency that brooked no delay. Within the stone walls of Buckingham Palace, senior members of the royal family made their way to the War Room, a space steeped in history. Once, this chamber had been the nerve center for Britain's defense, where strategies were devised to protect the nation from bombs, invasion, and crisis. Its thick oak doors had kept the country's darkest secrets safe for decades. Today, those same doors were closing to conceal a different kind of peril, a threat that arose not from foreign powers, but from within the monarchy itself. King Charles occupied the head of the long, polished oak table, his tall frame rigid, eyes narrowed, and jaw set in lines of restrained anger. Around him sat Prince William, composed but tense. Princess Anne, her posture straight and shoulders squared as if ready to confront any challenge. Prince Edward, quietly observing the room with a mix of concern and anticipation. And Queen Camilla, her expression calm but unreadable, a hint of apprehension lingering beneath her poised exterior. Before them lay the treasurer's report, its neat columns concealing the storm beneath. Every entry pressed down on the room like a silent indictment, revealing missing jewels, vanished private papers, and a betrayal that no ledger should ever record. The atmosphere thickened with tension, and then King Charles spoke, his voice calm but edged with controlled fury. "This is more than theft," he declared, the walls seeming to tremble with his words. "This is an attack on the dignity of our family. To take from Elizabeth is to defy the crown itself." Silence followed, heavy and unbroken. A suffocating stillness followed, one that seemed to press down upon every person present. For decades, trust had been the quiet, unspoken glue holding the family together, an invisible bond that made palace life function. Now, that trust felt delicate, like glass balanced on a knife's edge. Each gaze flicked from one face to another, searching for signs of guilt, for a hint of collusion, for any crack in the veneer of loyalty. The War Room, a chamber that had once planned the defense of an entire nation, now bore witness to a more intimate siege. Suspicion, fear, and the fragile unraveling of confidence within the very heart of the monarchy. Even the air seemed heavy with the weight of what had transpired, as if the walls themselves remembered the echoes of past crises and now whispered warnings of this new, more personal danger. In that moment, the royal family was no longer just a symbol of continuity and tradition. They were a family under siege, and the enemy, it seemed, might be closer than anyone could have imagined. But who could have the audacity to betray the crown so boldly? Who possesses the skill, the cunning, and the courage to uncover the truth and expose the mastermind behind such a daring act? An investigation in the shadows. King Charles, aware of the delicate nature of the situation, insisted that the matter be handled with the utmost discretion. He knew that even the slightest leak to the press could ignite a storm, tarnishing not only the family's reputation, but also the stability of the monarchy itself. The king's decision was swift and decisive. The investigation would proceed entirely behind closed doors, away from cameras, journalists, and the prying eyes of the public. To oversee this sensitive task, he turned to Sir Clement Mallister, a man whose loyalty had never wavered and whose discretion was legendary within the palace. Sir Clement was more than a security director. He was a shadow moving among the gilded halls, a silent observer trained to detect the slightest irregularity. From the moment he was entrusted with the case, he became the embodiment of vigilance, patrolling corridors and chambers as if the very walls whispered secrets to him. Every step he took was deliberate, every glance calculated. Sir Clement questioned the palace staff methodically, maids, valets, clerks, and guards alike. No one escaped scrutiny. He examined ledgers, shift reports, and access logs with painstaking care, seeking discrepancies that might reveal the smallest clue. Every movement of the missing treasures, every moment of inattention was a potential lead. As he prowled the vast corridors of Buckingham, conversations froze in his presence. Servants glanced downward, uneasy under the weight of his attention. The palace, once a place of routine and comfort, now hummed with tension. Every closed door became a potential hiding place, every shadow a possible accomplice in the unfolding mystery. Yet despite this quiet frenzy of investigation, the outside world remained oblivious. To the public, the palace continued to shine as a symbol of tradition and poise. Photographs captured the royal family smiling at public events. Broadcasts showed ceremonial processions and glittering receptions. Everything appeared polished and rehearsed, the perfect image of a monarchy unshaken by scandal.
This morning, a rare look inside a hidden part of Buckingham Palace, rooms off limit until now.
Inside those golden gates, however, the reality was starkly different. Fear and uncertainty gripped the family. Each member knew that the stolen treasures and private journals were more than mere possessions. They were pieces of the Queen's legacy, symbols of trust and history. The possibility that the truth might emerge weighed heavily, a silent specter haunting every hallway and drawing room. The palace had transformed into a house of whispers, where even casual remarks were filtered through the lens of suspicion. Loyalty was tested at every turn, and every action, no matter how routine, was observed for signs of betrayal. Sir Clement moved like a ghost, meticulous and unyielding. He would not allow rumor, fear, or speculation to interfere with the pursuit of answers. For him, the palace had become a labyrinth of secrets, each corridor a thread in the tangled web of deceit that had invaded the royal household. And in that tense atmosphere, the weight of history pressed down on all who walked those halls, a constant reminder that some truths, once uncovered, could change everything. Every corridor hid whispers, and the palace walls seemed to shiver under the weight of secrets yet to be uncovered. But who truly stood behind this audacious act? What daring measures were taken to expose them? Were they genuinely guilty, or was there more to the story? Let's explore the details. A web of betrayal. At first, all eyes turned to Donald Walton, the royal treasurer. After all, he had been responsible for safeguarding some of the most precious and historically significant items in the Queen's private collection. Whispers rippled through the palace corridors, and the tension was almost palpable. How could the jewels and journals vanish on his watch? Walton, usually composed and methodical, looked as if the ground had shifted beneath him. His face betrayed a mix of shock and disbelief. Yet, even in the midst of rising suspicion, he did not hesitate. He answered every question, provided every record, and offered full cooperation. His demeanor was sincere, and gradually the doubts began to fade. It became clear to those watching and questioning that Walton had not acted in bad faith. He was, in fact, one of the first to sense the gravity of the situation and the urgency of resolving it. Once Walton was cleared, the focus of scrutiny moved elsewhere. All attention now fell upon Robert Halton, a mid-ranking aide whose usual composure seemed to falter under the weight of the investigation. Though he had been part of the palace staff for years, trained in protocol and security, something about his recent behavior suggested unease. Small inconsistencies in his statements, fleeting hesitation, and an almost imperceptible tremor in his voice raised more questions than answers. When Halton was summoned for questioning, the atmosphere in the room became thick and suffocating. Every eye was on him, and every question pressed with increasing intensity. At first, he fumbled with words, avoided direct eye contact, and seemed paralyzed by the gravity of what was expected of him. But as the interrogators persisted, his defenses began to crumble. Slowly, his trembling lips parted, and he confessed to moving the treasures. The revelation struck like a thunderclap, yet the story did not end there. Halton's confession carried a twist that sent chills down everyone's spine. He had not acted out of greed or personal ambition. Instead, he had followed strict orders, instructions that came from someone far higher in authority than anyone had anticipated. The weight of this disclosure left the room in stunned silence. Whispers faded, breaths were held, and time seemed to stand still. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he revealed the source of the command. The name he spoke carried the full force of shock. It had come from Queen Camilla herself. At that moment, the implications settled over the palace like a cold, heavy fog. The scandal was no longer a simple case of mismanagement or theft. It was now a matter of royal betrayal at the very heart of the family. A quiet, tense dread filled the chamber as the realization took hold that the order to move the treasures had originated not from a subordinate, but from the queen consort herself. Whispers of betrayal echoed through the palace walls as Camilla's secretive orders sent shockwaves through everyone inside. But what drove her to take such a daring step? What reasoning could she offer? And how did King Charles respond to this unprecedented challenge? Did her explanation sway the monarch, or was it dismissed outright? Let's unravel the shocking details. The Queen's hidden hand. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt, leaving everyone in the room momentarily stunned. It was a truth so shocking, so almost impossible to accept, that for a moment, disbelief hung in the air like a dense fog. Yet the evidence, meticulously traced and confirmed, pointed unambiguously in a single direction. Camilla herself had orchestrated the removal of Queen Elizabeth II's most private and treasured belongings. These were not mere trinkets or decorative items. They were personal journals filled with thoughts the late queen had entrusted to no one, alongside jewelry pieces steeped in history, symbolism, and emotion. Camilla claimed she had acted out of a sense of duty, insisting her actions were intended to protect the monarchy. She argued that certain private reflections and letters, if revealed, could tarnish the image of the crown and undermine the trust of the people. To her, it was a shield, a way to preserve the dignity and legacy of Elizabeth, keeping sensitive matters away from prying eyes. But King Charles saw none of this as justification. To him, what had occurred was no act of protection. It was a profound betrayal. The careful reasoning and the noble-sounding excuses meant nothing in the face of the reality. Sacred items, entrusted to the family and the institution of the monarchy, had been moved, hidden, and handled without consent. In the dimly lit war room, where decisions of national consequence had once been debated, in times of crisis, Charles's anger was palpable. It radiated from him like heat from a forge, hotter and more intense than it had ever been before.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing.
You, the king's voice cracked with a mixture of disbelief and fury, have taken what was sacred to her. You have broken the very trust upon which this family, this monarchy, has always depended. His words echoed across the walls, heavy with the weight of centuries of tradition and duty. The accusation was not just about stolen items. It was about fractured trust, disrupted legacy, and the violation of everything Queen Elizabeth had stood for during her lifetime. Camilla stood in absolute stillness, the air around her tense with unspoken truths. She did not speak, did not attempt to defend herself, nor offer excuses beyond her earlier claims. Yet her silence carried a weight of its own, a loud, undeniable signal of acknowledgement, whether intentional or not. In that moment, there was no need for confession. The lack of denial spoke volumes. The damage was irrevocable. The betrayal, intentional or justified in her mind, had been done, and nothing could erase the shadow it now cast over the family and the monarchy itself. Camilla's silence spoke louder than words, her breach of trust destined to echo through history. But what came next, after the shocking discovery? Would she be pardoned, or would the weight of her actions finally catch up to her? Now let's uncover how Queen Camilla's betrayal shattered royal trust and tested the very authority of the crown. Exiled from the heart of the palace. The British monarchy had weathered countless storms throughout its long and storied history, wars, scandals, revolutions, and betrayals, yet never before had such a threat emerged from within its own highest ranks. The very notion that danger could originate from the Queen herself was almost unimaginable, yet King Charles now faced a reality he could not ignore. The decision that lay before him was excruciating, testing the limits of his judgment, his loyalty, and his devotion to the institution that had defined his life. And yet, one truth stood above all: the crown must come first. It was greater than marriage, greater than family bonds, greater even than love. The survival of the monarchy, its reputation, and the legacy of centuries of sovereigns depended on unwavering adherence to principle. With deliberate resolve, Charles issued a decree that would send shockwaves throughout the palace and across the nation. Queen Camilla, once a figure of influence and a trusted member of the inner circle, was stripped of her privileges, her authority, and her access to the private heart of royal life. In a private audience, she was informed that she would no longer be welcome within the walls of Buckingham Palace, the very halls where she had walked freely, advised, and commanded respect. The corridors that had once echoed with her presence now became forbidden ground, a symbol of the distance between personal ties and the duty owed to the monarchy itself. The stolen treasures, the sapphire jubilee brooch, the pearl necklaces, and the personal journals that contained the intimate reflections of Queen Elizabeth were recovered and returned to their secure places. The integrity of the crown's possessions had been restored, yet the unity of the monarchy was irreparably shaken. The announcement of Camilla's removal reverberated across Britain like a thunderclap, leaving the nation stunned. Headlines splashed across newspapers and digital platforms proclaiming the unprecedented action. The Queen Consort, a figure once inseparable from the royal household, had been effectively exiled from the very heart of royal life. Though the crown endured, its image bore deep scars. The message to all within and beyond the palace walls was clear and uncompromising. Betrayal, in any form, would not be tolerated. Not from ministers, not from aides, and certainly not from a queen. The delicate balance between family and duty had been tested, and the outcome was a stark reminder that the monarchy, above all else, demanded loyalty, transparency, and the protection of its sacred legacy. In that moment, the palace stood as both a fortress and a warning. Even the highest within its walls could not place personal ambition above the enduring authority of the crown. What do you think about Camilla's ban from the palace over royal property? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.